Hello everybody, Mobius1 here, bringing you another Star Wars Galaxies emulator video. In this video we're going to be talking about defense stats. I am all the way out here on Tatooine at the Lars homestead. It's very empty out here, not a lot to look at in this video, but I wasn't sure if I'm going to be putting text up on the screen while I'm explaining stuff in this episode, so in case I do, now there's plenty of empty space on the screen, so this video may not be the prettiest to look at, but if there is any information that I'm going to put on screen, at least it won't be cluttered. Additionally, a lot of the information that I'm going to be giving to you in this video is being referenced from a forum post made by Big Evil with research done by Denuic, which is one of the staff members. I'm going to put a link in the video description, so if you guys are interested in reading exactly where I'm getting all this information from, you'll be able to do that as well. Now, I'm sure when I said that I was going to be talking about defenses, a couple of you may have assumed that I was talking about armor. And actually, armor is a subject that I haven't fully covered in any videos yet, and I do plan on doing a video about that in the future. But in this video, I'm more specifically talking about your defense skill mods. Now, these are the defenses that you get through abilities or skill boxes in your professions, through clothing modifiers, or even through buffs from food and drink. You can view all of your defense skill mods by opening up your skills window, and they will be listed over here on the left under My Skill Mods. There are three layers, almost, of defenses in Galaxies. You have your primary defenses, you have your secondary defenses, and then you have your state defenses. The easiest ones to talk about are your primary defenses. These are melee defense and ranged defense. Just as an example of where you would get such defenses, if I open up my Teräs Käsi skill tree and look at the intermediate precision striking skill, you can see that I get plus 15 melee defense and plus 5 range defense, and this bonus increases the further up this skill line you go. Your primary defenses, as the name suggests, is your first line of defense against incoming attacks. The value of your ranged or melee defense is compared against the attacker's accuracy to determine whether or not an attack actually hits you. So the higher these values are, the higher chance you have of outright avoiding an attack. It is worth noting, and I'm probably going to be making this note a couple times during this video because this principle holds true for most of your defense values. Your primary defenses cap at 125 points. This 125 cap only includes sources from skills and clothing. So if you have some sort of combination of skills from your professions, plus you have the additional 25 points from clothing attachments that you can have, if that value exceeds 125, you're not getting a higher value than 125. Now, there is a little caveat to this that I'll explain a little bit later, but I don't want to get too detailed in that right now. Just know that 125 is the cap. That being said, any additional melee or ranged defenses that you can stack from food or drink buffs will take you beyond the 125 cap. So let's assume that an attacker attacks you, and their attack does in fact get past your primary defenses. They did score hit on you. That doesn't necessarily mean they hit you yet. You do have secondary defenses. There are 4 different kinds of secondary defenses in the game. You have dodge, block, counterattack, and defense acuity. As a matter of fact, the secondary defenses are arguably the most confusing. Once you understand how they work, they're simple, but the game doesn't really do a great job of explaining to you exactly how they work, and I get asked questions on these all the time. I see people making forum threads on Reddit about these all the time, and quite honestly, this is the primary reason why I'm making this video, is to talk about secondary defenses. So your secondary defenses are only applied to the combat calculation if you're using the proper weapon when an attack lands on you. What do I mean by this? Well, if I open up the skill profession again, let's take a look at, just for an example, the Pistoleer profession. Through the Pistoleer's pistol grips skill line, you can see that they obtain dodge. Plus 15 at 1, plus 15 at 2, plus 20 at 3, and plus 20 at 4. If I hover over the dodge ability, it says this mod increases your chance to dodge incoming attacks. That's great, but what it doesn't tell you is that this mod increases your chance to dodge incoming attacks so long as you're yielding a pistol. No, hold on, Moby, that's not entirely true. There is something else that you can wield. Yes, alright, so dodge only works if you're wielding a pistol or if you're wielding a one-handed melee weapon, because if we also look at the fencer profession, which one is it? Here we go. Intermediate fencing techniques. This branch in the fencer profession also grants dodge. This means if you have skills in either Pistoleer or Fencer and you pick up these skill lines that grant you dodge, if you pair this with another combat profession, so if you go like Master Fencer, Master Swordsman, which let's just look at Swordsman real quick. I believe they have block. No, I'm sorry. Swordsman is counterattack. Through intermediate sword defense, Swordsman gains counterattack. If you mix Fencer and Swordsman, depending on which weapon you're using at the time, whether it's a one-handed melee weapon or a two-handed melee weapon, different secondary defenses will be used. You'll either be using your counterattack with a two-handed sword or your dodge with the one-handed sword, not both. Because of the way secondary defenses work, it's very important for people that are interested in min-maxing their characters to think very carefully about what skill boxes they want to spend their skill points on. Because you can only use one weapon at a time in Galaxies, you want to be mindful about whether or not any skill mods that you're spending skill points on are going to be wasted based on your weapon that you're actually fighting with. What this does mean, though, is if you know you want to be a Fencer or a Pistoleer, and you want to try to max out your dodge ability, you can actually pick up that specific skill line in the other profession. So if you are Master Pistoleer, it's not totally useless to also pick up skills in the Fencer profession that increase your dodge. Even though you're not going to be using a one-handed melee weapon, the dodge bonuses from the Fencer skills will still apply to you while you're using a pistol. So what about defense acuity? Where does that come from? Defense acuity is actually a Terraskasi secondary defense. Terraskasi gets defense acuity from the precision striking branch, and if I read what it says in game, it says this modifier improves your chances of reacting to a successful hit with a dodge, counterattack, or a block. Terraskasi can actually do all three. However, defense acuity does not stack with any individual stat mod. That means even though you can dodge, counterattack, or block with defense acuity, adding dodge, counterattack, or block will not increase your chance to successfully do one of those three while using an unarmed weapon. Final note on secondary defenses, just like primary defenses, they do cap at 125. However, that 125 cap is only including your skill mods from abilities and clothing. It can be, you can go beyond that using temporary buffs from food or drink or squad leader or something like that. Now, melee combatants actually have a way to slightly increase their secondary defenses through the Center of Being ability. Now, Center of Being just kind of adds a flat value on top of your existing secondary defense stat, and that is determined by your Center of Being efficiency. So you can see through this same skill line in Terraskasi, Terraskasi's learn Unarmed Center of Being efficiency. So as you move up that tree, or that branch rather, I believe you get about 30? A little bit more than 30. Center of Being efficiency. So as long as Center of Being is active, whatever that value is going to be added to your secondary defenses. I'm not 100% sure whether or not the Center of Being is considered a temporary buff to take it beyond the 125 cap, or if that is included before the 125 cap. I would imagine it's included after. So I believe Center of Being takes you beyond 125. But if somebody has more concrete evidence to support that or to contradict that, please comment on the video and let me know. So the third line of defenses against attacks are state defenses. Now these are like your defense versus knockdown, defense versus dizzy, defense versus blind, those sort of defenses. Assuming we've made it this far through your defenses, you are going to be taking damage. But at this point, it's more to determine whether or not the state is actually going to be applied to you. Now, while most of these states are obvious the way they work, I'll just give you what the article or the forum post that I'm referencing says about them, just in case you don't know exactly what they do. Defense versus knockdown, very obviously, it knocks you over. Defense versus dizzy. Most people know what defense or what dizzy does, but there are a couple things that you may not know about it. First of all, the dizzy state, what it does is if you're dizzy, when you attempt a posture change, whether that's up or down, you have a chance to fall over. The two interesting things about the dizzy state that I don't think everybody knows is that, one, if you're dizzy and you attempt to change your posture into your existing posture for some reason, so if you're standing and you attempt to stand while dizzy, there's still a chance for you to fall over. And probably the least or the lesser known interesting thing about dizzy is even if you're dizzy, you still have a chance to succeed in doing a posture change. So just because you're dizzy and knocked down should not mean that you should not attempt to stand up. You don't want to spam your stand ability, because if you do successfully stand while dizzy, you don't want to accidentally try to stand again, because you will then knock yourself over again. But if you do carefully, attempt to stand, see if it worked, stand, see if it worked, stand, eventually, even though you're dizzy, you may successfully stand. Defense versus posture change, either up or down, that's kind of obvious. If you're standing and somebody uses an ability on you to try to change your posture either one way or the other, that defense will prevent that from happening. Which also, if you're dizzy and a successful posture change attack hits you, it will knock you over. Defense versus blind. Blind obviously is a reduction to accuracy. We haven't talked about accuracy yet, but we will a little bit later in this video. If you're blinded, you take a negative 60 modifier to your accuracy, and that's a pretty big hit. According to the post, it says that it also affects this stat called dodge, but it's a slightly different dodge than like the Fencer Pistoleer dodge. Effectively, it just is like it's basically like a negative 60 to your primary defenses, which is kind of bad because your primary defenses are what ultimately determine whether or not you are hit or missed. This means being blinded actually has a negative impact on your defenses as well as your offenses, which I didn't know until I started researching this. Defense versus stun is actually more important than I initially thought too. Apparently, if you're stunned, your total damage is reduced by 20%. In addition, while stunned, your primary defenses are reduced by 50%. That means if you are stunned and blinded, your primary defenses, which cap at 125, are effectively reduced by 110. Ouch. And lastly, defense versus intimidate. First of all, what does intimidate do? Intimidate does three different things. Firstly, it reduces your primary defenses by 20 points. This means if you're stunned, blind, and intimidated, your 125 defenses are 0. So unless you're using food or have some other sort of temporary buff to increase your primary defenses, with those three states applied to you, you have a 0% chance of dodging an attack. Which sucks really bad when you find out what the second thing Intimidate does, which is completely nullifies your secondary defenses, which means no more dodging, no more blocking, no more counterattacking, or no more defensive QEDing. Yeah, that's a word now. The third thing Intimidate does is reduce your damage by 50%. 50%? That's insane. That means Intimidate is like a really, really big effect on a target. Now, there are 2 Intimidate abilities in Galaxies. Both of them are from the Brawler profession. You get Intimidate 1 at Novice Brawler and Intimidate 2 at Master Brawler. The debuff that you get for being intimidated, whether it's 1 or 2, is the same, and they do not stack. The only difference between 1 and 2 is how long of a duration it lasts. Intimidate 1 lasts for 30 seconds, while Intimidate 2, get this, 2 minutes. The only other defense stat mods that are in the game are ranged and melee damage mitigation. Now these, you can see them in the advanced combat profession skill trees. So if I look at Terraskasi Artist, intermediate balance conditioning gives you melee damage mitigation 1, expert gives you damage mitigation 2, and master gives you damage mitigation 3. And this is pretty much every combat profession in the game gets these at roughly the same level, but you do have ranged and melee are separate. So how did these defenses work, and what exactly do they do? It's a little bit different than the other defenses because they're not increasing by a value. It's either 1, 2, or 3, and that's it. It is important to know that these defenses, the mitigation values, they are applied regardless of what weapon you're using, and they do not stack with each other. So if you have a ranged mitigation 1 from one profession and ranged mitigation 2 from another profession, like if you're a Pistoleer rifleman for some reason, the 1 and 2 will not add to 3. The game just looks at the highest value mitigation you have for both ranged and defense, and that's the one that's used in the combat calculation. What the mitigation values do is reduce the range of damage that an attacker can do to you by a fixed percentage based on what value you have. The percentage is 20% per level. So a melee damage mitigation 1 reduces the overall range a melee attacker will do to you by 20%. Melee mitigation 2, therefore, is 40%, and mitigation 3 is 60%. So what do I mean by reduce the overall range of damage that will be done? If you look at any weapon in Galaxies, it has a minimum and a maximum damage. Now, this isn't the most amazing weapon in the game, but I'm going to use it as an example anyway. Let's just round the minimum damage of this weapon to 100. It's 99 points, so we'll give it an extra point out of pity. Let's say this weapon does 100 to 270 damage. If I attack a target that has a melee damage mitigation 3, that means this range from 100 to 270 is going to be reduced by 60%. So what is the range? Well, if you do 270 minus 100, you get 170. If you take 60% away from 170, you get 68. Therefore, any attacks done with this weapon against a target with melee damage mitigation 3 is not doing 100 to 270, it's only doing 100 to 168. And that's disregarding any sort of kinetic resistance that they may have because of their armor. Not to mention armor piercing or armor rating, which I'm going to get into those into a whole different video because with that one we're going to have to bust out our math thinking caps. Bottom line with damage mitigation is if you're going to be fighting, ideally you want to have at least one profession with damage mitigation 3 in whichever type of combat you think you're going to be fighting against most, if you can't get both. I mean, having both ranged and melee damage mitigation 3 in a combat build decreases damage from all sources by 60%. Well, I can't really say it's 60%. Decreases the damage range from all sources by 60%, which is still a really, really big deal. It's not a flat 60% damage reduction, but it's close. Now, since we're talking about all these defenses, it is important to talk about accuracy. Now, because accuracy is used several times during the combat calculation, first to determine whether or not your attack lands against your defender's primary defenses, but the accuracy value of the attacker also increases the chance that a state is applied even after the attack lands. So just know, because of this, having a high accuracy value is very important, not only to hit your target, but also to stick your combat states on them. And there is no cap on accuracy. Alright, so the last thing to talk about in this video is that 125 cap little caveat that I said we had earlier. So, since Publish 7, the way the combat calculation was tweaked a little bit so that any reductions to your primary defenses are done before the 125 cap is checked. What does that mean? Well, that means if somebody intimidates you, which decreases your primary defenses by 20 points, that 20 points is going to be taken off of whatever your primary defenses are before the game checks to see if they're over 125. So, if somehow you have 160 primary defenses, which is ranged in melee defense, if you have 160 melee defense and somebody intimidates you, the game is going to check to see if you're over 125 after that 20 is taken away from the 160, which is a very, very important detail, because that means if you, even though primary defense is capped at 125, it is beneficial to go beyond that cap in order to help combat anything that would reduce your defenses. Right, because if 160, you take 20 away from 160, that brings you down to 140. 140 is still over 125, so the game says, okay, you have 125. But if it worked the other way around, which it did at one point, if it said you have 160, oh, no, the cap is 125, and then you got the minus 20, then you'd only have 105. So ordering is pretty important. Keep that in mind, just to reiterate, going beyond the 125 cap for primary defenses is beneficial when you're fighting somebody who's going to be applying states on you that reduce your defenses. And that's really all that I wanted to cover in this particular video. Like I said, I will be doing one on armor and armor piercing in the near future. It is relevant to this stuff, but it's a little much to cram into one video. I know this video's got a lot of information, and that one will too. Though I do want to mention, I'm going to put another link in the video description to my video on clothing and armor attachments, just because we're talking about caps and, you know, the 125 cap coming from your skills and clothing attachments. If you're not already super familiar with how clothing and armor attachments work in Galaxies, please go watch that video, because it is possible to mess things up if you have a clothing attachment with more than one skill mod on them or something like that, or to know what the cap on clothing mods are, that sort of thing. So that's it for this video. A lot of information. Thank you again to Big Evil and Denuic for compiling all this helpful information into one location on the forums. Again, the link is in the description if you care to go over this sort of stuff in text. There is a little bit more there than I covered in this video, but all the important stuff I believe I covered. Any questions, don't hesitate to post a comment. I'll try to answer any that come by. And any corrections I will put in the video description. Just something to note, YouTube is doing away with their on-screen annotation feature, which means going forward I will no longer be able to put any corrections to any of my videos on screen in like a little bubble. So from now on, if I happen to give any misinformation and I'm corrected, the corrections are going to be in the video description below. So please, if you do follow my channel pretty regularly, get in the habit of checking the video description just to see if there's any updated information. Alright, so thank you guys for watching. Mobius1 here, and I'll see you next time. You thought I forgot, didn't you? ADK Giveaway is going to be Friday, March 30th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. More details will come in a later video, but mark your calendars. Friday, March 30th, 4 p.m. Eastern Time.